Today's question: how low am I willing to go? 1 Peter 5:5 reads, "Yes, all of you be submissive to one another, and be clothed with humility, for God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble." Humility. Where do we begin? I guess we need to start way down low. Now, I'm sure some of you must be saying, wait a minute, I don't like where this is going. But let me explain. First, let's be clear on what humility does not mean. Humility does not mean less in value or worthless. Humility does not mean weakness or inability. It's not thinking little of yourself. It's thinking about yourself little, or perhaps not at all. Humility is choosing the low place. It's the absence of pride and the absence of self. Humility is willingly choosing to serve. It's choosing to point attention away from ourselves and onto others. Humility is a heart attitude. It's not an outward show. I sometimes like to sum it up this way. Humility says, not by force or by coercion, but of its own free will, I will be small and I will go low. In 2 Samuel 6, King David had just brought the Ark of God back up to Jerusalem. It was a day of celebration, for the Ark represented God's presence among his people. The trumpets were sounding, the people were shouting, but not everyone was pleased. Michal, King David's wife, watched her husband through a window with shame. Why? This was a great day in Jerusalem. But David, the king, was celebrating among the common people, dancing before the Lord with all his might. Michal was not impressed. Even worse, in Michal's eyes, the king had laid aside his royal clothing and was wearing a linen ephod, a sign of servanthood. David had humbled himself before the people. We read, Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "How glorious was the king of Israel today, uncovering himself today in the eyes of the maids of his servants, as one of the base fellows shamelessly uncovers himself." Can you just hear the sarcasm in her voice? And what was David's response? Perfect humility. "It was before the Lord," he said. "Therefore I will play music before the Lord, and I will be even more undignified than this, and will be humble in my own sight." Yes, David, king of Israel, was saying of his own free will, I will be small, and I will go low. How unlike the world we live in. They tell us, go high, make a name for yourself. But the Lord Jesus says, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you, but whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." We must not miss this. A proud person is a vulnerable person, for they are self-confident. They fail to rely on the grace of God, his strength, his power, his wisdom. They lift themselves up to a place which they are incapable of handling. They take to themselves a kingdom which they are not equipped to rule. But picture it. The higher a person lifts himself, the more off balance he becomes, and the more open he is to assault, making himself an obvious and easy target. And such a person is resisted or opposed by God. It's significant to note that the devil is mentioned in both James and again in Peter in connection with pride. When we choose pride over humility, we invite the enemy's attack. Humility recognizes that we are nothing without God. but it also recognizes that our God is everything. And that is why we are able to gladly take the low place and serve. It's because we know that our God is in control. We are trusting Him to work in any situation. But humility doesn't necessarily mean that we will have a low position. We might. But remember, David was king. Rather, it's about serving those around us, serving those in our circle, whether we are a king or whether we are a king's servant. All of God's people are servants, no matter where He chooses to place us. When you open the curtains in the morning, you might notice the specks of dust floating in the air. Andrew Murray reminds us that we are like those little specks of dust, and God's love is like the sunshine flooding through that window. We are playing in the sunlight of God's love. In the grand scheme of creation, our part is so small. But we, like David, are not thinking about how small we are, but about how great the sunlight of God's love is. So we, like David, can dance before the Lord. That's humility. Christ humbled Himself for us, even to the point of death on the cross. We can gladly accept the least, the worst, or even nothing at all for His sake, can't we? And what is God's promise to the one who does this? God gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that He may exalt you in due time. Thus says the high and lofty one, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy, I dwell in the high and holy place with Him who has a contrite and humble spirit. Take the low place. Serve the people around you as you delight in the sunlight of God's love.